Hi, this is Ken Mary from FLOTSAM and JETSAM, and you're listening to Sonic Perspectives.
What's up, Sonic Perspectives listeners? This is Rodrigo Altaf, bringing you another interview for your favorite source of music news. With me today is Ken Mary, the drummer of FLOTSAM and JETSAM and Fifth Angel. Ken, thanks for agreeing to do the interview today, man.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, FLOTSAM has a new album hitting the shelves this January 18th entitled The End of Chaos, the first studio effort with you on drums. So it must be a pretty busy and exciting time for you, I guess.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had a great time making the record, and it really was a fun experience. As you probably know, the musicians in FLOTSAM and JETSAM are pretty crazy good. You've got incredible guitar players and Mike Gilbert and Steve Conley, an incredible bassist, and Michael Spencer, and I think one of the greatest rock singers of all time, AK.
Indeed.
He's incredible, and so it was a lot of fun making the record, and I think if you listen to it, it sounds like all five musicians going pedal to the metal for the whole album.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Yeah. And you joined the band for the North American tour with Hammerfall in the last segment of 2018, I think. And I saw a few pictures and videos of that tour. You guys seem to have had a great time on the road.
Yeah, we really did. Actually, I was with them. I think it's going to be coming up in August. I've been with them a couple of years. We did some European tours as well. But yeah, the Hammerfall tour was a lot of fun too. So yeah, we tend to usually try to have a little bit of fun out there.
Yeah, well, I have the new album already, The End of Chaos, and myself and my friend Joe Barrios, we interviewed FLOTSAM's guitar player Michael Gilbert just before Christmas. He was all compliments to your contribution on the album, and you seem to have now found a home for your skills at last, right?
Well, it's certainly nice to play music where you can actually, you can really play some technical pieces that actually fit into the music, and that's one of the things that I think is kind of magical about FLOTSAM is, if you listen to that record, everybody, there's so much stuff going on. The guitars are going crazy, the drums are going crazy, the bass is going crazy, the vocals are going crazy, and somehow it all still works together and makes sense. And so yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a tremendous amount of fun to play this type of music.
Well, I saw the videos for Demolition Man and the most recent one to come out, Control, which has like a Jason Bourne kind of 007 vibe. The album doesn't seem to have one single breathing moment. It's pedal to the metal from the first note to the last, just like you said. Do you feel comfortable with such approach that relies more on speed and less in groove, or?
Well, I'm comfortable with, all kinds of different styles of drumming. I've played jazz, I've played fusion, I've played pop, I've played metal, I've played rock. So I'm really comfortable with anything, honestly. But I think in terms of, if you look at drums in particular and you look at where the progress has been made, jazz drumming has stayed pretty much the same. Jazz drumming is jazz drumming, and even prog music has stayed pretty much the same. I mean, there's a few little changes here and there, but if you want to look where the advancements have been made, it's really in metal. That's where the drumming advancements have been made, and so for me, that's kind of what I gravitate to. I gravitate to where the envelope is being pushed. And things are getting, more and more, not necessarily difficult, but definitely, the envelope is being pushed. And I think that's why I enjoy that type of music so much.
And I love your drumming on this album, particularly on the song Slowly Insane. For some reason, I thought this one was the most dynamic song drum-wise. Do you have a favorite one on this album, or?
That's really funny that you say that. Yeah, drum-wise, that was actually one of my favorite too. That I totally agree with you. That one is really has some great dynamics and some really cool time. Where I'm playing with the time signature and that was really a fun one. So in terms of drumming, that maybe that or Control, might be one of my favorites. I mean, Prisoner of Time's another great one. I mean, there's so many great songs on the record. So I like all of them, but I totally agree with you on Slowly Insane. That's actually a really cool. That's one of my favorite drum tracks.
And what kind of input did you bring to the studio this time for the writing and recording, aside from the drumming?
Well, I had some input into some of the lyrics and some of the melodies, those kinds of things. And I basically tracked AK, in my studio, and the drums in my studio. I have a full SSL facility. It's like a real studio.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like where it's got like a huge SSL console and a lot of outboard gear and great microphones and a great room. So, I think those were all kind of contributions, that made the record kind of, hopefully what it is.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously you've been on the road with them before, but with material like that, I can imagine the shows being quite the workout. I mean, the only song on the album that seems to give you some breathing room is Recover, but not by much. What kind of physical preparation do you go through before a tour like that?
Well, when you tour with Flotsam, for me, it's been extremely, you have to be aware of your physical shape maybe more than anything else I've ever done. Also, I think none of us are 20 years old anymore either. And so, for me in particular, I actually control it by, I tend to do well by, just kind of being, I don't want to say a health nut, but, kind of very conscious about the health. When I'm on tour, I don't drink anything, no alcohol, no sugar. I try to stay away from sugar as much as possible. I try to eat as healthy as possible on the road. And if you do that, I've just noticed that it's not that hard, but you're right. I mean, the Flotsam set playing live is a tremendous workout. But by the time you get, especially if you're doing headlining shows, and you're talking about an hour 20 or an hour 30, I mean, it's basically, it's almost like, you're running the whole time. Yeah. So it is definitely a workout. But I think if you take care of yourself and, you really pay attention to what people, I think especially when you're young, when I was young, I could just eat whatever I wanted and get away with it. And, as you get older, you have to kind of, alter your regimen in terms of your health. But I think drumming is probably, one of the positions in the band that takes the most out of you. I think drumming and singing, I think those two positions in the band are probably the most difficult.
Yeah, I have to agree. Yeah. And you also played in one of my favorite releases of last year, Fifth Angel's The Third Secret. And what a comeback that was, at least for me. I guess from a professional and sentimental standpoint, it's got to be special for you to see your first band come back with such a strong album after almost 30 years. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's funny that you mentioned that, because when we did that record, we were very concerned about the fact that, we don't want to do anything to tarnish the legacy of what the band was. And that's why we hadn't put out a record in the past, because in the past, we had thought about doing it several times, but we just didn't feel comfortable with the songs that were being written. So this was the first time where we kind of went like, hey, this is really working, and this is something we can put that name on, and we can be proud of it. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a great album. That's something I produced and wrote, a great deal of that record. So it was, you're right. It's kind of a nostalgic thing, and that is my, that's my first band. So yeah, it was definitely fun to go back and revisit that.
Yeah, I interviewed John Michael just before the album came out, and I remember reading that you guys were invited to do a reunion show in Germany in 2010 and again in 2017. That prompted the return of the band. What was it like to receive an invitation to play in that festival so unexpectedly?
Well, in 2010, I wasn't really working with the band yet. That's something they had been kind of doing on their own. But then in 2017, I think I had been talking with Ed and John, and I said, hey, can we get the footage from 2000, the 2010 show. I wanted to see what the footage looked like and how the band did and all of that. And so I asked the promoter Oliver for the footage, and he said, "Well, yeah, we can send it to you. Also, would you guys like to play?
Wow.
In 2017." So I kind of, it kind of stumbled into, doing the show again. And then I was still nursing a shoulder injury that I thought was going to be healed up. So we accepted the show and we were going to go do the show. And then, I wasn't able to do it, but the rest of the band did it. And a friend of mine, Jeff McCormick, sat in again and did a great job. And so everything went well.
Oh, cool. And I have to comment on the change you guys had on the vocals department. I never knew Kendall Bechtel could sing, and he did such an amazing job on The Third Secret, man. That was like a hidden secret for me.
Well, that was one of the main problems we had and why we hadn't really put out an album in the past, because we worked with, a number of really talented singers, but whenever we would start the recording process, for whatever reason, it just didn't really sound like Fifth Angel. And I think when Kendall started singing, he was in the band, since 1988 or something, or 89. And I think it was something that he kind of knew what was supposed to be there. And I think that really helped a great deal in terms of the band sounding like Fifth Angel.
Yeah. And I think the album was quite a departure from songs like Time Will Tell or Broken Dreams, which are more on the AOR side. And those propelled you when you guys started. Was there an intention to make a heavier record, or is it just how it played out?
Well, I think, from our perspective, we always, and I see a lot of fans talk about it too, they talk about, hey, they kind of like that, that first album. It seems to be the ones that the fans kind of gravitate to. And we did put on some nice songs that I would say are kind of AOR. If you look at Can You Hear Me? I think that's a nice AOR.
Yeah, the single.
Yeah, and I think that there's other tracks that are not, super heavy tracks that would be applicable for radio. But I think that I think as a band, we tended to like the first album a little bit better than the second album, even though the second album had great songs on it too. But the first one, I think, we kind of look back at that, and I know it's considered, those are both considered classic, metal albums in Europe, for sure. But, the first one is kind of like the original inspiration for the band. So we kind of wanted to go back to that. Who knows, maybe if we do another one, then maybe we'll go more towards Time Will Tell on the next one.
And what's the plan right now for Fifth Angel? Are you guys going to tour or do another album? Was it still in the cards, or?
Well, we don't know yet. We're going to see what happens. We're doing a show in Germany, I think February 16th, and then we're going to kind of see what happens. We certainly would love to do more music, and honestly, this last album was really for the fans. It wasn't for us. It wasn't for the press. It really was something that we had. Nowadays with social media, you can have direct interaction with your fans, and there's so many people that were saying, hey, are you guys going to do a new album? We'd love to hear something new. And so it was a labor of love. It really wasn't something that, we made a lot of money off of or anything like that. It really was something that we did specifically for those fans. So I guess we'll see what happens. And if the fans still want us to do more music, then we'll do more music.
Okay, and I guess the common thread between the two bands, Fifth Angel and Flotsam, is that both suffered a little bit of a struggle when grunge made it big, and the audiences changed a lot in the early 90s, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Fifth Angel particularly, it kind of shut that band down. So I don't really know, like Flotsam still did some big albums in the 90s, so I don't think it affected them as much as it did a band like Fifth Angel. That was more of like a neoclassical metal kind of thing. Somehow, Flotsam seemed to survive and thrive through that era, but certainly for Fifth Angel, it was a tough go.
Yeah. Well, I would like to cover some other moments in your extensive career, but before we go into that, what drove you to become a drummer, and who would you name as your main musical influences while growing up?
Wow. Well, it's kind of weird because when I started playing drums, I really started in elementary school when they ask you, in school, at least when I was growing up, they would ask if you want to play an instrument. And I was always hitting things with, like pencils on the desks. The teachers are always having to take that away. And I was always pots and pans and that kind of thing. So for me, when I got into sixth grade and they said, "Hey, would you like to play an instrument?" It was like, well, yeah, I want to play drums. So, I did, and that's where I started. And in terms of the musical influences, I mean, I had a whole host of influences from all the way back from, jazz and fusion players like Buddy Rich and, I'm just blanking on the guy's name. But anyways, obviously there's some ones that have influenced almost every drummer, like Neil Peart, Tommy Aldridge, Alex Van Halen. Kiss was the first concert I ever saw.
Oh,
and
okay.
so, I was a huge Kiss fan. When I met Gene Simmons later, when I was working in House of Lords, I told him he owed me about $1 million because I had all of their posters, and I used to go to all of their shows. I mean, and that was where I really, I had been learning jazz and fusion from my drum teacher, and I was learning about guys like Steve Gadd, and Bernard Purdy. And Louis Belson, learning about those kind of players, and then learning, about bands like Yes, and, some of the more progressive and fusion influenced bands. And then I saw Kiss when I was a kid, and I was like, I want to do that.
Makes sense.
So,
yeah.
It's kind of so that's kind of where, the influence, after that, I definitely wanted to be in rock. And, of course, that's kind of where I ended up going. So, but, I still do love jazz, and I still do love fusion and prog rock and a lot of different areas of drumming. I mean, I really love all different sorts of drumming. So for me, I just think that, it's what I'm known for. I think people know me as a rock and metal player mostly.
Yeah.
And I think also, like I said previously, it's sort of where the progress is being made in terms of moving the instrument forward in terms of to the next level. I think metal is really where that's happening.
Absolutely. I have to agree. And for those unaware, I guess it makes sense to mention that you also played with Alice Cooper on Raise Your Fist and Yell. That's one of the heaviest Alice releases and one of the strongest lineups he had with Kip Winger, Kane Roberts, and yourself. You must have a lot to tell about touring and playing with him.
Yeah, touring with Alice was awesome. And, I always joke around, people go, well, how did you like him? I said, well, I never actually met him, I was joking, of course. We toured for 3 years and did Raise Your Fist and Yell and did tons of festivals and concerts and shows. And, I look back on that time with very fond memories, especially the time with Kip and Paul and Kane and myself and a guy named Devlin Seven, which I don't know if you know who he is, but he was the rhythm guitar player. And so it was a great time. I mean, that was my first major tour, and I was very young. And the biggest place I'd played prior to that was about 3,000 people up in Seattle. Seattle is where I grew up. And then my fifth show with Alice was sold out Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, 22,000 people, and broadcast live on MTV at the same time in front of about 20 million more. So it really was, just going from, it's, if you think about it in a car, it's almost like I wouldn't use a car as an analogy, but you're going from 0 to 100 in 1 second. It was just like you just lightning speed. All of a sudden, you were just accelerated, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, we had a great time that first tour, and the chemistry between all the musicians was incredible, and we're all still friends to this day. I had lunch with dinner with Paul and his wife last time he was in Phoenix, and I saw Kip last time he played here, and I talk with Kane almost every day. So, it's those are friendships that kind of just lasted, they last a lifetime.
Hmm. Awesome, man. Awesome. And let's talk a bit about the two other bands you were part of, Chastain and Impellitteri. I only recently realized you played on two iconic albums that I like a lot, Chastain's Voice of the Cold and Impellitteri's Answer to the Master. What was it like working with those two bands?
Well, it's very, I'd say, different. David is definitely a great guy to work with. He's very reserved and kind of quiet. And just, you kind of know what he's expecting, and he does a great job of getting great performances out of you. And so he was really kind of the more or less producing those albums, and practicing. We would rehearse for a couple days, and then we would record the albums, and it was always a lot of fun working with David. And again, we still stay in contact. I just had some contact with him on Facebook, and he sent me some copies of the reissues of the Chastain records, which is really nice of him to do. And it's just the fact that people are listening to those albums, I don't know, 30 years later or something, or whatever it is it's a huge compliment, I think, to the work that we put into them. And then as far as Impellitteri on Answer to the Master, Chris is definitely less reserved than David, and he's more of a, I think he knows really what he wants too. He's very, I think both of them, I think the similarity is that they know what they want, and then I think the difference is the way they go about getting it. And working with Chris was always a lot of fun and a lot of energy. And he's one of those guys that, he'll record a guitar solo, 200 times, to get it the way he wants it to be. So, I think they're both kind of perfectionists, and it was a lot of fun working on both of those albums. And I agree, Answer to the Master, that was one of my favorite Impellitteri records as well. So are you a drummer? You must be a drummer.
I'm not, man, but I still listen to those albums like almost every week. There's still.
Well, it's just really weird because, I've played on tons and tons and tons of albums. And those two, I agree with you. Like I would I'd still listen to those records as well. So it's just funny that you're picking out the very songs and then the albums that are my favorites too.
Yeah. Well, for some reason, I always enjoyed bands that have like great drummers, and if a band has good songs but a bad drummer, I just can't listen to it for some reason. I don't know. Hard to explain.
I agree with you. Well, I think you can I think drums are one of those critical components in a band. I think you can take a band that's like maybe an average band, and if you put a great drummer in it, you can have a really good band. And then by the same token, you could have a great band and you could put a not good drummer in it, and all of a sudden you have a very mediocre band. So I think drums are kind of a critical component in terms of how the band's energy is going to be, and how the solidity of the band is going to be, and how much, especially in metal, like you want to sound like a machine, and so if you have a drummer and they're not tight and they're kind of floaty and not loose, or their meter's bad, it's gonna affect the whole band. So I really do think drums are a critical component, for any rock or metal band.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't help but also mention House of Lords, a band you played with that surely deserved better luck as well. And I guess that was between Chastain and Impellitteri, right?
Well, Chastain and Impellitteri were more studio projects. House of Lords was something that I was actually, I was signed to the recording agreement. We were on RCA. We were through Simmons Records, and so we worked closely with Gene Simmons. And so, that was something that was, actually, I was a band member of, an equal partner, so to speak. And, so that was a different experience, I think, than something like Impellitteri or Chastain, because that's something where, I did have a lot more input. I was a writer on like especially Sahara. I had a lot of writing on Sahara. We all had a hand in production. We co-produced that with Andy Johns. So it was something that I think was, for me, more of the beginning of what my long-term goals, because I always wanted to produce. I always wanted to be a writer. I was getting more into that, in that well, in Fifth Angel and House of Lords particularly, those were areas where I was, starting to really learn my craft in those areas.
Yeah, and at the same time, there was a lot of expectations about House of Lords, and for some reason they didn't materialize, right?
Well, I think we kind of ran into the same thing that, Fifth Angel did and,
Hmm.
like in Flotsam. I mean, once the grunge thing kind of hit, it really took, the steam out of a lot of, I think, rock and metal. And it really overnight, especially in the United States, which is the biggest market for music, it really killed off, so many of those bands, and not only the bands, but also the producers, because, all of a sudden you didn't have a record deal, and back in that day, people don't remember, this is before Pro Tools. So, if you were going to make an album that was going to compete on a global scale, you had to spend 50, 100, 150,000, $200,000. I think on Sahara, I think we spent like $230,000.
Wow.
And because, we were doing that, with a great engineer, a great studio. Those studios were $2,000 a day back then, back in, and we're talking late 80s, early 90s. And so, if you lose your record deal back in those days, I mean, that was something that was catastrophic in terms of how would you afford to make a record that's going to be of any decent quality without having access to, some serious funding. So it really put the brakes on a lot of those bands. I think with House of Lords as well, I just think it was one of those things where the scene had changed so dramatically and so quickly that that style of music was no longer marketable.
Yeah, from one week to the next, I think everything fell apart.
Yeah,
And
sure.
it's sad really because I've been doing all these interviews for Sonic Perspectives, and I recently completed 60 interviews, and it's amazing how much this subject of grunge in the early 90s comes up because it ruined everything for so many bands at that time, man.
Well, the weird thing to me was the fans of that music just hated us. And that to me was really weird because you never saw that in the music industry in the history of, I'm a big history buff of music. Like I love the history of music. And the only time I could think of anything like that happening would be at the end of the 70s and the early 80s when, everybody was
Punk.
saying, "Hey, disco sucks" or whatever.
Yeah.
If you look back in music history, that's the only other time that happened. And just the fact that the fans were so, like adamant about it, like, you guys, we hate you guys, is basically they just hated us.
Yeah.
And to me, that was like really weird in terms of, like it was a weird thing. Grunge didn't last that long. There's only a few bands that really kind of stood the test of time. I mean, you've got Nirvana, you've got Soundgarden, you've got Pearl Jam, and maybe Alice in Chains.
Yeah, you named them all.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
You've got like four bands that stood the test of time. And I laugh because back then those fans were making fun of, Kiss, Aerosmith, Iron Maiden. They were totally mocking these bands. And these are the bands that are playing, Megadeth, Metallica. They were just making fun of all of those bands. And all those bands now are playing stadiums.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all of the bands that we were talking about, maybe there's one or two of them that might be able to play a decent sized stadium, like probably one, I think, that I can think
Yeah.
of, but I don't think there's anyone else. And so it didn't last long. I mean, it lasted about 3 or 4 years and then just kind of went away, and it was eaten up by, at the end of the 90s, then you had the boy band thing with NSYNC and
Yeah.
Backstreet Boys and all of that stuff. But it was a weird time, honestly, and it really took all of us by surprise. I got more into production at that point because I was just like, hey, if nobody wants to hear this, I'm not going to try to, make
For
people
sure.
listen
Yeah.
to it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice segue because I was just going to ask you about your work as a producer. You have a studio, Sonic Fish, right? How do you split your time between going out on the road, recording albums with the bands you're part of, and also producing and engineering other artists?
Well, I have an assistant, and so, we split some things up. And then also, when I have to leave, I do take laptop Pro Tools with me and try and do some work on the road as well.
Uh-huh.
It's obviously a little more difficult to do that. But depending on what we're working on, like these days, we're probably working on a little more like television, film kind of soundtracks as opposed to albums. We do some albums, obviously. Still, I mean, that's still obviously a function that we do well, and we still do that. But I would say our business over the years has gone more from music and maybe a little more towards television and film. I just think that there's a growing base there. If you look at the independent film industry, that's kind of exploding right now. If you look at Netflix and Amazon Prime, and there's a lot of now that people can make really high quality movies for it's just like Pro Tools with albums. Now you can make a great sounding album for maybe $20,000 or less sometimes, depending on what you have. And for films, it used to cost you millions of dollars to make a film. And now if you can get a Sony Red camera, for under $50,000, and if you have some talented people working, you could shoot a whole film for, $100,000, $150,000. So you have a huge explosion in that industry too. And so, I guess what I'm saying is, for the studio part of it, that's becoming a little bit more of our business, and that is something that I'm able to do, while I'm mobile, while I'm on tour.
Well, it's a new millennium, right? You can do anything. You can record a whole album just on your computer without even meeting the other musicians, right? So,
absolutely, and that's the other thing that's so great. I mean, if you look at the technology nowadays, I mean, we were talking about it. I've talked about it in other interviews that you could do songwriting. You could have a Skype session, and I could be on vacation in Hawaii and be writing a song with somebody in New York City or London or whatever. So it really is incredible. And then the other thing that's really cool, I think, about this era is that, you can have direct contact with your fans, which is really amazing. I mean, when you think about that, like in the early days of, my career, you would never have the ability to do that. I mean, the only way you could have interaction with your fans would be like to meet them after the show or something like that, and you wouldn't obviously be able to meet that many. So it's really cool, with social networking. You can actually get feedback. You can have people tell you, hey, we really love this song, or we love this direction, and you can kind of let the fans kind of get some input into what you're doing, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of gear, FLOTSAM is going to attend the NAMM in Anaheim in a few days. Are you guys playing a show there, or just for the gear? And what kind of things do you look forward to in an event like that?
Well, NAMM to me is like going to the world's largest guitar center. So, in terms of gear, well, I guess I'll answer the other part of the question first. Yes, we're going to be playing at Ultimate Jam Night, which is NAMM's biggest event. I think last year there was like 3,000 people, and so it's the biggest concert event of NAMM. So we're going to play there. We're definitely going to be looking at gear. In terms of what we look for in gear, I think probably there's going to be no mystery. For me, I'm going to be looking for studio gear and software, and then also just some of the components that I use live. Obviously things like, I do have the companies that I work with. I work with Pearl drums. I work with Sabian cymbals. I work with Aquarian drum heads. I work with Vader drumsticks. I work with another company called Stick Grips, which is a really cool item that helps you keep grip on the sticks, and it's clear, so you don't really see it. The drumsticks look pretty normal,
cool.
But it kind of gives you an extra grip, and they just heat shrink onto your drumsticks. Really cool. I use a Rock and Sock drum throne, which has really helped me out a tremendous amount because I've had some back problems in the past. Trying to think of what else. DW pedals. And RB snare drums is another company that endorses me. So I have a lot of different endorsements, and it's always good to just say hello to everybody and all the people that work at those companies, at least the ones that go to the shows, and just say hi to friends. I mean, there's a lot of friends that I have in the music business that you don't really see except for maybe once a year because they're touring or you're touring. And so it's a great chance for everybody to kind of say hello and usually I run into tons of people there, so it should be fun.
Yeah, I bet it's a great event, man. I've never been to one of those, but there's similar ones here in Toronto, which I go from time to time. So, and well, aside from that, there are about 30 dates already booked for the new year, including a few shows in Europe with Destruction and Overkill, and a show here in Toronto that I won't dare to miss. So you're getting ready to hit the road very soon, right?
We are, yes.
Yeah.
And we're excited to do that. And, the band, I haven't toured with Destruction, but they're really good friends with everybody else in the band. And the rest of the band speaks really highly of them. And certainly, I don't know the guys in Overkill except for Jason. Mm-hmm. And he's a great guy. So it should be, a fun tour, I think.
Yeah. And let's finish off with a message to the fans.
Absolutely. To the fans, yes, I just want to say thank you all so very much. People always say, without the fans, we're nothing, but it really is true. I mean, it's a fact because it's the greatest honor I can think of when somebody appreciates your art. Like when I have fans come up and they've bought records or they come to a show or whatever, it's just one of those things that I just think that's the ultimate honor because they're saying, hey, the art that you create is worthy of my time and my money. And to me, that's just like an amazing thing. And so I'm just so grateful over the years for all the different fans that have supported all the different albums and all the different artists that I've worked with. And I look forward to seeing you all soon.
That's great, man. Well, Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this lengthy conversation with you tonight. I wish you all the best in the future endeavors, and let us connect again for that Toronto date and share a drink when you're here.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Rodrigo, and you have a great evening.
You too, man. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.
Okay, folks, that's a wrap. Once again, we appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to our interviews, and I hope you enjoyed this long talk with Ken Mary of FLOTSAM and JETSAM. As always, we ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel just so you're up to speed on all our interviews and our Talking Perspectives podcasts. I also invite you to like us on Facebook and Twitter and check us out on www.sonicperspectives.com. We're going to leave you with the song Control from FLOTSAM and JETSAM's new album, The End of Chaos. Take care and see you next time.